Caitlin Clark walked into her second WNBA season carrying more weight than any second-year player in recent memory. After a 2025 rookie campaign that rewrote record books, she led the league in assists per game and averaged 19.4 points. Every eye in the sport turned to Indiana to see what an encore would look like. The answer, through the first stretch of 2026, has been messier than the highlight reels suggest. The Fever have looked dazzling in bursts and disjointed in others, and a lot of the conversation around the team has settled on one question. Is this roster actually built to let Clark do what she does best, or is it working against her? That's a fair debate to have. It's also one that gets easier to have honestly once you separate what's actually happening on the stat sheet from the narrative people want to tell. So let's go through it position by position, starting with the bench and working toward the names that matter most. The bench mob. Tyasha Harris and the search for stability. Indiana's backup point guard situation has been a quiet trouble spot. Tyasha Harris, brought in to spell Clark and keep the offense organized when the starter sits, has played sparingly, 11.3 minutes a night across 10 games, scoring 2.4 points with 1.7 assists. Those aren't bad numbers for a third guard, but they're not numbers that suggest a steady second unit, either. When a team is built around one transcendent decision-maker, the minutes she isn't on the floor become a real swing factor, and Indiana's bench offense has too often gone quiet in exactly those stretches. This isn't really a story about an individual letting the team down. It's a structural issue. Clark's gravity is so strong that whoever shares the backcourt with her, starter or reserve, gets measured against an impossible standard. Harris's limited role reflects a coaching decision as much as a performance one, and it's worth remembering that bench point guards across the league rarely get asked to do more than steady the ship. Miesha Hines-Allen and the frontcourt depth question, where Indiana has genuinely lacked punch, is up front behind Aliyah Boston. Miesha Hines-Allen has given the Fever 17.5 minutes a night, averaging 4.5 points and 3.5 rebounds on 43.8% shooting. Those are role player numbers for a role player's minutes, not a disaster, but not the kind of interior force that takes pressure off Boston or gives Clark another reliable target on the move. The criticism that's circulated about this frontcourt, that it doesn't crash the glass hard enough, doesn't set the kind of screens that spring Clark loose, doesn't punish smaller defenders in the paint, has some truth in the aggregate numbers. Indiana ranks toward the back of the league defensively this season, and a chunk of that traces to a frontcourt rotation that's serviceable rather than punishing. But it's worth saying plainly, this is a depth problem, not a single player's failure. Hines-Allen, Monique Billings, and Makla Timpson are splitting minutes behind one of the league's better young centers, and none of them were brought in to be a number one option. Damiris Dantas, the floor spacer who hasn't spaced the floor, if there's one addition that hasn't delivered on its original promise, it's Damiris Dantas. Indiana brought her in to add shooting touch and rebounding toughness off the bench, a stretch forward who could punish defenses for collapsing on Clark's drives. The fit made sense on paper. In practice, Dantas has played just 9 minutes a night across 6 games, scoring 3.5 points on a rough 30% from the field, including an 11% clip from three-point range. For a player whose entire value proposition is floor spacing, a three-point shot that isn't falling undercuts the whole plan. To be fair to Dantas, 6 games is a tiny sample, and cold shooting stretches happen to everyone. Sophie Cunningham and Lexie Hull have had their own ice-cold nights from deep this year, too. But if the Fever are leaning on her to be a release valve for opposing double teams on Clark, the results so far haven't matched the assignment. Kelsey Mitchell. A storyline that's already been resolved. Here's where it's worth pausing, because a lot of the chatter about Mitchell, holding the ball too long, or being at odds with Clark's game is actually relitigating a debate from last offseason, one that's already been settled. Before free agency opened in April, there was real, legitimate discussion in Fever media circles about whether re-signing Mitchell was the right move, given the tension between her scoring instincts and Clark's need for the ball in space. That debate centered on fit next to Clark, not on Mitchell's talent, but the Fever made their decision. Mitchell is coming off a career season, averaging 20.2 points, 1.8 rebounds, and 3.4 assists while shooting 45.6% from the field, production that came during a season complicated by injuries and roster turnover. She was named an All-Star, earned first-team All-WNBA honors, and finished 5th in MVP voting. Indiana didn't hesitate. Re-signing her became the franchise's top priority, and she's now the highest-paid player in Fever history. Clark herself said it plainly to reporters during the offseason. Mitchell was her first priority in free agency and her running mate in the backcourt, someone who makes it real easy for her. This season, Mitchell is averaging 20.3 points on 45.4% shooting with 2.7 assists, production right in line with her career. Is she a plus defender? No, and analysts have noted that's the clear weak spot in her game. But that critique applies about as much to Clark herself at this stage of her career, and nobody is suggesting Indiana built the wrong backcourt around its actual best player. The ball-dominant scorer clashing with a pass-first star story made for compelling off-season debate. It isn't an accurate description of what's happening on the floor in 2026. Aliyah Boston, the one player nobody should be criticizing if anything, the player most central to making this roster work is having one of her best seasons. Boston is averaging 17 points, 8.4 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.1 steals, and a league-leading pace 1.2 blocks per game, shooting better than 49% from the field. She leads the Fever in rebounds, steals, and blocks. Any narrative that paints the supporting cast as uniformly dragging Clark down has to explain away the fact that her primary frontcourt partner is performing at an all-star level. So what's actually going on with Indiana? The honest version of this story isn't 5 bad teammates are sabotaging a superstar. It's that the Fever are a deep, talented, but imperfectly balanced roster, still figuring out its identity in real time. Complicated further by the fact that Clark has been managing a lingering back issue that's kept her questionable for 9 straight games. And the team opened the season 4-4 while allowing the second most points per game in the league. A 184 loss to Portland, in which Clark managed only 6 points, marked the low point of a rough 2-game stretch. Since then, Indiana has rattled off 5 wins in 6 games and now sits at 9-5, third in the East. And Clark was just named Eastern Conference Player of the Week for a 3-game run that included 76 points, 20 assists, and 13 rebounds, highlighted by a 32-point, 10-assist double-double in an overtime win over Chicago. That arc, slow start, health questions, sudden surge, tells a more accurate story than a tidy villain list. The bench depth behind Boston is thin. The reserve guards haven't found consistent rhythm. Dantas hasn't shot the way the front office hoped. Those are real, specific issues a contender needs to solve. But the headline pieces around Clark, Mitchell, Boston, Hull aren't the problem. They're playing well, in some cases spectacularly well, and the version of this team that's struggled has mostly struggled because its head coach is half a step from full health and its bench rotation hasn't gelled. Fix the depth, get Clark fully healthy, and the roster everyone wants to blame starts looking exactly like the championship caliber core the front office believes it built.